things that happen, luckily we can recover from all of them.
We're live, or we're going.
Good morning. Today is Thursday, March 14th, 2024. It's 9 a.m. and we're taking a bill. We're actually going to work on two bills that are cousins here this morning. S306, an act relating to changes to the clean heat standard, followed up by S305, an act relating to miscellaneous changes related to PUC. So with that, and just to recap for folks, on 306, the main concern is that the timeline is envisioned by S5 a year ago, turned out to include an intermediate milestone that has not been, workable, and really in 2020 hindsight doesn't quite make sense. It asks a DDA to be named far in advance of even a description of the program that would ultimately be administered by a DDA. So we're looking for a subsequent milestone in the whole sequence of events to help us keep track of moving things and have a more appropriate and rational way of keeping the train schedule working for everybody. That's the subject matter for 306.
And just,
Chairman McDonald.
you run the numbers if most of the bills have nicknames.
So clean heat standard,
Thank you.
that's the first, thank you, sorry. Get a little fall into jargon sometimes. And then 305, the miscellaneous bill had a number of provisions. And we were discussing pending to that, the miscellaneous provisions. I don't think there was any controversy. There were two housekeeping items. But we also wanted to address, while we're on the topic, how could we sort out the sort of the surprise the legislature and the energy efficiency utilities got in terms of how the money and the amount of money being awarded under the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act pilot phase 2. So we're looking for sort of a plain language fix. And I'll jump ahead to say, from my point of view, and I think I'm speaking for the committee, we're looking to see the full amount of money awarded. We're looking to see it awarded for the full period of time so that those running pilots can proceed with some certainty. And we still want an appropriate test for reasonableness of the measures taken. So with that, so I'm going to double back to where we started, S306, the clean heat standard, and start with Mr. McNamara. So thank you for coming back.
Thank you. So Ed McNamara, Chair for the PUC. Do not have proposed language for you. This is just again reiterating what we're asking for in our mind is not changing the end implementation dates of the clean heat standards. This is simply the fact that when we will not have sufficient information to appoint a DDA. In my mind, I'm not sure how a entity we would want to be DDA would put forward the appropriate bid, since it wouldn't be clear what exactly they'd be doing. So we're very open to, I think last time, 2 days ago, we talked about potentially having July 1st, 2025 because at that point, hopefully it's really clear what the parameters of the clean heat standard are at that point, and therefore more information or sufficient information to appoint a DDA. I've also heard in the background that there's this idea that there could be an earlier date, but you're approving the plan for a DDA and not actually a DDA. There's all different permutations of doing that in my mind, as long as we move that June 1st date to a reasonable time later. And again, we're not at all trying to delay any implementation date of the clean heat standard. There also, I just will flag that depending on how it's structured, there is going to be some pain points for somebody. For example, right now, you have obligated entities have 120 days to decide if they're going to use the DDA or not. obviously, if you push back the appointment of the DDA, it's going to be more difficult to potentially shorten that time. So just being upfront and honest about that, and
Yeah.
you might want to hear from folks about that.
Sure.
My apologies that we don't have a clear language at this point, since it's
Okay,
pretty
well,
well.
Thank you for that, and it's very helpful. My sense is that we'll discuss language and today. Unfortunately, we've not had council because our council is part of a full court press on the House side, so it's hard to get drafting, but at any rate, that we'll have a discussion about possible language, and then we'll circulate, as often happens this time of year, interested parties, we circulate language, get an extract, and my hope would be that we get another draft out for everyone's review this afternoon. And that by tomorrow, the dust has settled and we find a workable plan from all the participants' perspective. To your point, I've heard a similar idea floated out that potential DDA would bring forward a budget and work plan, something along those lines. And that we would shorten up the time period by which an essentially obligated party would have to make an election to go to DDA or not, so that we keep things in a rational sequence with enough time between them so people can vet the ideas and respond.
Senator
White, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologies for being on Zoom again. So I just had one question about this topic, which is, do we need to put in new language all of the additional dates that would be pushed out? Or do we just need to put in a July 1st, 2025, and then subsequently things would shift themselves in that process? Or do we need to be explicit in each of those dates? I know I don't have the physical copy. It's sitting probably right next to Mr. McNamara on my desk with the timeline of how things were moving out, that Gantt chart. Do we need to edit all of the things within that, or can we just select a specific date?
Good question. I think it in part depends on if we just pick July 1st, and then I don't think that there's a lot other than when the obligated entities have to respond or decide whether to use the DDA or not. And I don't believe that any other deadline or date after June 1st, 2024, I think the vast majority of them will stay. There actually aren't that many other than January 15th, when we submit something to you. Does that answer the question?
That does. And it sounds like we don't have language because we don't have counsel available yet on this. So my assumption is, based on your answer, Mr. McNamara, that we would just be changing that one specific thing rather than having to go in and do anything else.
That is probably the easiest and has impacts on other folks. So I just want to leave open the idea that other people might propose something different, and I'm not necessarily opposed to alternative ideas, provided that they actually work and don't change. And again, I really am trying not to do a sneaky way of changing the end date of implementation. I'm trying to figure out how we actually sequence this in a way that it can have an effective DDA. And I'm very open to different possibilities within that. So
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate everyone's adhering to January 26th. We're just trying to figure out, I don't know that anyone a year ago, and there's someone who could have imagined that 26 dockets would be open under a single project. So it seems a order of magnitude more complex with more dependencies than anything I've watched. So we know everybody's doing their best. Great, thank you. Any questions for Mr. McNamara? Thank you so much. Mr. Ford, you're next on the list. Thank you. Good morning. You two are being awarded frequent flyer miles coming back.
So this week, very some making up for the first couple months.
We missed you, so.
Yeah, right.
I'm not seeing us pretty much every day from here to May.
Anyway, for the record, TJ Four, Public Service Department, I'll be brief. I think I concur with, everything Mr. McIntyre said. The critical, barrier we're trying to overcome here, that's being tried to overcome here, is this June 1st, 2024 deadline that just is not feasible. And I just want to just keep in the back of your mind is the other impact when, if you're not aware, said people may get squeezed, is public engagement is something to just keep in mind and how that happens. I think there's you know, any time that the PUC is making a decision like appointing a DDA that should come with a certain amount to be defined as the engagement contractor comes on board of engagement, and depending on when that happens and when the events happen subsequent to that, that will be affected. You know, right now, moving it from June 1st is really helpful for engagement, and so that is great. And it's just how it happens after. If we get too granular in setting a lot of dates or setting specific dates, you know, from between you know, passage of the legislation next year to the end of the year, then that could decrease flexibility. So, I have also heard about the concept of having it be the DDA plan that has the date certain, and I think also open to that as a concept. The way I would envision that in my mind is that the DDA plan happens kind of at that's what the commission solicits when they do go out to solicit as somebody or somebody's to be a DDA. If they have plans that they submit, we need to be time to negotiate that, and that's where the engagement may need to happen. And then and then they appoint with the plan at the same time. So I think that's all I have to say. Folks have questions?
Well, that's helpful, and that's good. You know, sort of just Senator White's question, like. Keep our eye on the ball. If we move one thing, make sure that there's not a cascade that we don't intend to follow from the changes that may come. Okay, any questions for Mr. Ford? Thank you very much. With that, I know that I spoke with Ms. Bailey this morning, but let's see her, be blind. She was gonna be coming from some other.
She'll come in for the
Round two.
efficiency modernization.
Okay.
So
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Powell.
I'm trying to get dates in my head, but so we passed the clean heat bill, it was vetoed. And then the next time we passed the clean heat bill, the administration persuaded us to do a check back was scheduled for.
Well, it's two checkbacks. The first was February 15th. That was a report, and I talked about that a little bit. Tuesday, this past Tuesday, unfortunately, you weren't here. I talked that for. And then the second checkback to me is really information alongside the proposed rule. It would be the same date as the proposed rule that we're going to be filing in the January 15th, 2025. January 15th, 2025 is the date that we filed the second check back in the proposed rule.
Sorry, my understanding, and I to be incorrect, was that the request was so that the proposed rules that would have to be introduced as a bill would be available to the public for the next election. So those of us that were going to run for election would declare ourselves, and it would be known.
So
I said, my number is what, 1,336 days, beginning to the end of World War II, which is just an arbitrary time period. we're cruising past that, as if there was no urgency.
So if I can, the Department of Public Service is required to. What's the type of,
Sorry, potential study.
sorry, potential study, and that I think is due around September.
September the first, yeah.
And so that is, Senator McConnell might be what you're thinking about, that there will be further information on September 1st, and that is going to help inform a lot of the potential cost information that we, the commission will then have in our check back report on. But the potential study will have a fair amount of information to watch this. Well, fair statement.
Yeah, and right, so dates for the check back report and the proposed rules are not being proposed to be changed, so. Everything should still be available as a 10 bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
What was the number 1336? Birthdays?
From the day after Pearl Harbor to the day that the Japanese said we're done. And then there was another 10 days until they signed the paperwork. Thereabouts.
So when I divide 1336 by 365, I get 3.6 years. And I think we're gonna do that.
And you gotta throw in a leap year in there.
You know, we had a question or math about the or the
No, I quoted you, let's say, I had to re-picture the number.
This was the day the Japanese said we're done, we're stopping hostilities, and then the surrender came.
on the SS Missouri.
Yeah.
Senator McDonald, you'll be happy. Senator McCormick made your point. Yes, when you were not in committee, he made that point with the correct number previously.
But I corrected for the leap year, which you neglect.
The 10 days either way is not a big deal, but we keep talking about tackling climate change, and this winter's 5-month seasons, and it always seems to kind of slip.
Yeah. So we'll keep the tradition going. And meanwhile, let's, Ms. Hoffman, good morning. Thank you for coming back. And I think our committee assistant's just gone down to the copy room, so I think we may be getting copies of language you sent. And thank you for bringing language, because if nothing to help advance the conversation, like see something in black and white on it between the four corners of the page. So thanks for that contribution to helping us move the language forward. Yeah.
If I may, just a procedural point, what Ms. Hoffman provided is draft language on 305.
Oh, okay.
306.
Not true. Okay.
And so, Mr. Nauer and Ms. Hoffman are here to help out for any technical information, but I think Ms. Hoffman, most of her contribution is gonna come with 306, the second.
Well, I still thank you for your draft, and I just realized I'm referencing it too soon in the proceedings here. So I think then we've had a conversation, as often happens this time of year, there are folks.
Well, Miss Bailey, she's right out here.
She's welcome to come in. I
Yes.
think we're
No.
not up to that.
Thank you.
Rather hang in the hall. Anyway, and thanks for now coming back too. So I think probably a helpful thing at this point was Mr. Walsh, you've been acting in part as a point person for some of the conversation. It's an open dialogue. The construct I heard last night, and Mr. McNamara referred to it, is might we, instead of having a deep, well, I hear no disagreement whatsoever that we should be removing the June 1 DBA milestone. Does it make sense? And then what's the substitute action? So the substitute action that I heard that makes some sense to me, but I'm not a DDA or potential DDA affected party. So, and also the PUC would have to implement, so I'll put the proposal on the table as I understand it, and that is to move, I believe, to September 1st of 25. A budget / work plan from a potential DDA. And by virtue of having pushed to September, there's that 120-day shot clock that works back from January of 26. So we would need to shorten that time period up so that they come in sequence rather than across each other. And the proposal I heard for that was to shorten it to 90 days from 1/20, so that they end up lining up, I think, on September 1. So let me float that out as a construct I've heard, and let me see, do we have, we don't, Mr. Springer?
He had
He's
to
not here.
respond, he didn't respond to my.
He's here for S305 as well.
Okay,
Oh,
well, you're right, back to the double header. So, Mr. Walsh, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, or
Sure.
yeah, please. Well, let's put the idea on the table. Make sure that I've stated what I've heard as a proposal accurately. Go from there.
Sounds good. For the record, Ben and Julie Walsh with the Conflict Interest Research Group. So you have, you put this idea on the table. Let me just articulate it to make sure we're all on the same page, and then speak to, briefly from Deeper's perspective, why this, still worked with the flow for a 2026 first year of obligation, which it seems like is what everyone is really trying to preserve here. So the concept, as I understand it, is deleting one date and then changing one, adding a date and changing one number. So the date that would be deleted, of course, would be the DDA appointment date. Obviously, the DDA would still be appointed, but it just would, the PUC would be given flexibility as to exactly when that needed to happen. And then there would be a date added for the approval of the 3-year plan, the DDA's 3-year plan and budget. That would be potentially September 1st of 2025. So the PUC would need to figure out from their perspective when, if that's when they need to approve the DDA's plan and budget, when would they need a DDA appointed, and what other steps, RFIs, RFPs, what's in those RFPs, one or more that they would need to get done in advance of that potential September 1st date. And then the other number that is in play here is the 120 days notice for the default delivery agent after the credit cost is announced by the PUC. Right now in the statute, after the DDA credit cost is announced, obligated parties have 120 days to decide whether or not they're opting out of paying into the DDA, or whether they are in fact going to meet their obligation through the DDA. And so if that needs to flow, and from our perspective it does need to flow from the date that the budget is known, which is essentially when the cost is going to be known. Shortening that timeline could make sense in order to make the whole timeline flow for a beginning of 26 start date for all of this. So moving that date from 120 days down to perhaps 90 days. And so if you think about the math here, if it's September 1st for the plan and the budget, and by extension the credit costs, then you're looking at October, November, beginning of December for the obligated parties to make their determination of whether they're opting out of the DDA or not. And then in that scenario, the whole program can still move forward on a timeline that the legislature expected when you all passed this last year. So I guess the last thing I would say is just in terms of why delete a date for one thing and add a date for another. In a way, again, from our perspective, the date for the determination of the budget and the plan is actually sort of the more critical date in terms of the flow of the whole timeline. And so making certain of that date and giving the PUC flexibility on when the DDA needs to be appointed based on that date makes more sense than setting the DDA date in stone and leaving the budget and plan approval up in the air. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but you know, at a high level, that's what I understand the proposal to be and why we think that it would work.
So let me just double check on the DDA election opt-out piece of things. Is it not less than, you know, the 120 days now? Is it that, an obligated party shall make an determination as whether they're in or out, not less than 120 days prior?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you're looking at Act 18, it's page 17. Right in the middle of the page, the commission shall provide not less than 120 days notice of default delivery agent credit costs or costs prior to the deadline for an obligated party to file its election form. So an obligated party can assess options and inform the commission of its intent to procure credits in full or in part as fulfillment of its requirement.
So, I'm not sure, you cited two things going on there. So one, there's basically sort of publication of a price. So DDAs can, so that obligated parties can say, oh, good price, I'm gonna go with that program, or I'm gonna opt out, do it myself. I'm just trying to understand if 9/1 is the date at which a price is gonna be determined. And on that same date, an obligated party is gonna make the determination to be in or out. It does, I'm not sure how that, maybe I'm misunderstanding how that connection works. It just sounded like they're landing in the same date, which would give time for discussion review, making a decision.
No, as I understand how this would work, if you set a September 1st or any other date for the commission to approve the DDA plan and budget, that on that date or very shortly thereafter, the PUC would be able to say, this is going to be the cost for credits delivered through the DDA. And then that starts the clock for the 120 days or the 90 days or whatever other number of days. And so if that's September 1st, then you have until several months later
Yeah,
to make that election.
I didn't realize the clock was going forward from the announcement of that.
Yes, yes.
And given that we're getting close to a little bit closer to the January 26th, we're short 1890. Got it. Okay. Thank you very much for digging in. With that, I should invite Mr. Walk to join us. So I know that there are many entities that could decide to make an application to become a DDA, but frankly, you could, one of the parties that potential party that's been helpful in our discussions all along, helping think through sort of the DDA side of trying to come up with a workable plan. So we would be generous enough to share thoughts on this, that would be helpful.
For the record, Peter Walker and Director of Missions in Vermont. Again, my DIC hat on today. I think that the change in the naming, in the dates, right, in the naming of the date, what action are we actually requiring to happen by is a very good change. To me, that allows for the process, the PUCs to establish a reasonable process between now and that date to establish what the DDA expectation for a DDA or multiple DDAs would be. And then time to select one, evaluate a plan, do significant public process around that plan to make sure that it adequately meets the needs of the program as established by the rule. I think that that time, that additional time and capacity is a very valuable thing. I am aware of the compression of all sorts of timelines and the challenge that may put on the obligated parties. I don't think there was any necessarily magic to the 120-day number. But I do understand that anytime you change a value, it has an impact on those involved. I think there will be a lot of information available prior to that September 1 date that, you know, where there'd be a draft plan that was in evaluation and being reviewed in advance of that, and conceivably where, you know, a obligated party can begin that decision making process, but you know, change a number and you change the timeframe, something has to decide, but I think the first piece of solving to making sure that DDA is a functional piece, because in the way you set up the law, the DDA is the first choice, right? And the opt-out is for those who choose to do so. So you need to make sure that your first option is ready and effective.
So September 1, 25 and 90 days for the election period.
We would support that change on this.
Single ones.
Thank you. This is very encouraging. Just want to double check on something, which is if you're just thinking about what a DDA would need to feel comfortable moving forward. Excuse me, there had been some question in my mind as to whether or not you want to know who's opting in and who's opting out for. But it would be sufficient to establish the plan, the program, the budget, 3-year plan, whatever, and then get the data for who's paying them.
So I think there's a lot of that process is gonna happen regardless, right? The in and out piece, there is a budget, there's a sort of plan reconciliation period after the opt-out
Okay.
period
Okay,
that allows for some consideration of what the, you know, who, you know, if the potential study assumes the DDA or, you know, is going to deliver so much, or that's the assumption going into the plan, and it turns out that the obligated parties have a path to pursue compliance less expensively, then we'll have to adjust because there are certain fixed costs associated with that one.
Mhm.
And so we'll have to figure that piece out. That is a known risk at present.
Okay.
There are lots of them in this process. I would love to have perfect information before making a decision, but I want to respect that 2026 implementation date. And so I'm trying to work within that to make a reasonable outcome for the process. There is risk in, as we talked about yesterday, what you all might do in this building next year with the rule. But that September timeline provides for a period of time after the session for adjustments to be made to the plan and the approval process that would allow for any changes that were made as part of the legislative session. So I think I think that's one of the key pieces. If you do it any earlier than September 1, that puts that into challenge, right? If the bill isn't, you know, assume worst case scenario, it's not law until July 1, right? Any earlier than date of that to make any significant adjustments or changes to that plan would be a challenge, given the nature of that planning process and the public engagement process that the PUC affords everybody as part of a traditional planning process like the EDUs do for their demand resource plan. So I think there are jam ups everywhere along this path. I think this to me is a reasonable way to thread the needle.
that's helpful, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Watt? Okay, great, thanks so much. And Mr. Springer has joined us, apparently on sort of for the short window. So, Mr. Springer, we're talking about the the new formulation for the clean heat standard piece. I don't know if you were dipping into this conversation to participate in that part of it, or if you wanted to
You asked for him to come.
just hold off until we get to the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act discussion that will follow.
Yeah, good morning. I don't think Burlington Electric has any comments on the clean heat standard legislation. And we're happy to offer any further comments on the energy efficiency modernization. But if it's not the right time, I'm happy to hold off on that.
Okay, great. Yeah, we will be coming to that after we work through this. Thanks so much. So I think I'd like to go back then to Mr. Nauer and Ms. Hoffman. You heard some of the discussion. You're on the sort of the receiving end of implementation and the implications of a date change land in your shop. I don't know if Mr. McNamara's offered some feedback. I don't know if you have anything you would like to add.
Thank you. Yeah, from my perspective, the proposal that has been discussed over the last 10-15 minutes seems very reasonable and a more workable approach. One thing I'll throw out there, and would really like to hear from fuel dealers and or obligated parties, is how does the 90 days fall, and is there an opportunity to shrink that to some lesser number? If I think as the proposal stands right now, we would hear from obligated parties on December 1st. So we would have 31 days to review and issue a ruling on those obligated party elections. And that doesn't give a whole lot of time for the DDA to react to obligated parties who have opted out and amend their plans. So, it's a short amount of time. Maybe it's feasible. We'll learn with time. So that's my perspective, and just wanted to throw that out for a discussion.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for thinking about all the actors that need to have this thing to work for, keeping all the gears meshing. Any committee questions for Mr. Nauer? Right. So hearing none, and thank you for teeing up the segue. Mr. Cota is with us in the room, so we're going to join us and talking about obligated parties and how a 90-day window works for them versus 1-to-1.
Happy to comment on that. One other thing, but if it's okay with you, right? Matt Cota for the firm of Meadow Hill. With many hats. Representing multiple entities in the building, but where it's relevant to this, it's the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association. It's the Northeast Hearth and Barbecue Association. It is the heating and cooling contractors of Vermont. These are the entities that are delivering, servicing, selling equipment that creates heat, and selling the fuel that creates heat. Some are obligated parties, some may be potentially credit generators, some will be a little bit of both. I also was appointed by the Public Utility Commission to serve on the technical advisory group. I'm one of 15 designing the clean heat standard. I've also been appointed to the equity advisory group by the Public Utility Commission to ensure that there's equity in whatever is provided. I am not on the climate council. That position is still vacant to be awaited the appointment by the Speaker of the House. It's been over a year.
I'm climate council in terms of someone representing the fuel dealers.
The law requires that a fuel dealer representative be on the climate council. And that position has been vacant.
Thank you for flagging that, okay?
So. Appreciate the opportunity. I can answer any questions about our work. I would say that the technical advisory group had a robust discussion at our last meeting about the delay. Or about the movement of the deadline for hiring a default delivery agent in there, and I don't speak for that group. I can say that there was, and I told them I would say this, that there is disagreement about whether it is the right policy or not. I tend to think personally that it would be extremely difficult for me if I would decide to form a DDA and make a bid to understand even what I'm bidding on, because I don't know if those obligated parties in fact will be able to find enough credits on their own that I would be wholly unnecessary. Possibility. We haven't designed it yet. We haven't decided which products and services count for credits and for how much. That is critical. That is the work that is being done at TAG, the BUC, the consultants, and the the full-time 12 months. And that is important work that's happening, but hasn't done yet, and hopefully done it. There is one day that is not in the bill that I really asked you, and I was sitting in this chair a year ago. And I suggested we change one day. It didn't happen. Senator, I've worked with you for a very long time. Been in this building a very long time. And we asked that the date of registration be moved to July 1. By January 31st, from January 31st. Remember, we come back a year. And this system may not work, and the legislature may choose not to implement the rule. And decide to go a different path in order to achieve the mandate from the Global Warming Solutions Act, because this is one way it's been proposed, it's not the only way. So, but what will stay because of the law, because of Act 18, is the registration. We may never implement a clean heat standard. It may go away next year. But we will always have, until the law is rescinded, a fuel dealer registry. That registry, by law, has to happen on January 31st. We asked for July 1. Why? January is our busiest month of the year. Senator, you said, in jest, I believe your word, that we should make it more difficult for you to deliver it if you're delivering false goods. Well, it felt more like a punch than a punchline. I'll be honest with you, Senator. Now's the chance to fix it.
First of all, I am sorry that it felt like a punch. To me, it was obviously a joke. And when various folks in the Northeast Kingdom put out the video, they said with their healthy indignation, I thought anyone who heard it said, well, obviously that was a joke. I'm sorry if my delivery was not as clear as that was a wisecrack.
I appreciate that, and I believe you, and I know you long time, I do believe it is, but here's the chance to fix it. January 31st came and went, and by my back of the envelope calculations, because I probably keep track of the fuel dealers better than anyone else in the state. We had 30% compliance. What happened? Well, the Public Utility Commission said we only gave the information for a short amount of time. They sent out an order saying, you get a pass. You get a pass until the end of February. I asked for the data, how many have we got now? Because I have a good idea of how many fuel dealers are out there. How many people, and mind you, every communication that I put out, every meeting that I put out is you must register. If you sell a gallon of propane at a hardware store, or you sell 20 million gallons up in Burlington, all of you are on the same regulatory suit. The law is clear, you must register. And I'm on the record, and I'm proud of that. Of defending this law, making sure there's compliance. Yeah, I'm not sure there is. And part of it is the lack of forewarning, but part of it is we're really busy in January. And we use, even though fiscal year starts, the calendar year starts in January, the fiscal year for most of us, including state government, is July 1 to June 30. And that's also how we track our heating season. From an implementation standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, I implore you, change one other date. If you're gonna change one day, change one other. Because this will live with us forever, whether we have to babysit or not. Change the registry date, January 31st to July 1. You'll have greater compliance. You'll have a better ability to ensure that the information provided by the registered entities, remember, not just the obligated parties, every entity that sells a drop of heating fuel in or into Vermont must register. Change that. It's one quick change. January 31st to July 1.
Okay. So thanks for that. We can. I want to have a conversation with that, but I just want to double back and make sure that the other dates we were talking about, September 1, 120 goes to 90. You find that a workable change from an obligated, representing folks who are potentially obligated parties, having adequate time to make a decision.
Right, so I'm going to, and this is a complex policy, and I'm deep in the weeds, but I'm trying to communicate as best I can, how I understand it, being someone who's literally designing policy. What we need, first of all, we don't think it's an either or, you're either, it's not a binary choice, whether you're gonna choose the default delivery agent or you're going to provide on your credits. The vast majority of obligated entities will do a combo platter. They will try to meet all their obligations without paying the default delivery agent, but some will fall short, and that's how it will happen. With a mixture of products and services, because that's the plan. If it were simply a fee to move to electrification, we would have done that. This is not that. This is to allow heating service companies and heating fuel companies to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in their products and services. Great, okay, let's prove that we can do that. That's what we're designing. But what they need to know, more than anything, whether it's a June 1 date or September, whatever it is, what they need to know, is they need to have advance notice of what the costs are going to be. Should they not wish to produce their own credits? What is the default, if the default delivery agent say it's going to cost you this, you sold this many gallons, that's this amount of greenhouse gas emissions. That means your credit obligation is thus, and the cost is this. Okay. And then they can make a business decision that says, yep, I'm gonna write a check. Or they can make a business decision that says, no, I'm going to invest in this. I'm going to invest in training for electricians because I see a better opportunity to maximize profits that way. Or they're gonna say, I'm going to invest in this bulk storage facility that sells renewable liquid fuels. They need to know this, so 180 days, 90 days, I mean, they need to know, they wanna know now. I mean, I get the calls every day. How much does this credit cost? How much does the credit card cost? I'm doing this, I'm doing that, is that worth, what's that worth? And I'm on the inside, and I'm telling them, I don't know. We need to know. So advance notice on what that credit cost is. It's critically important for the obligated parties, so they can make a business decision on whether to stay in business, whether or not to just pay the default delivery agent, or whether to take that money that they would have paid the default delivery agent and create their own or buy or barter their own credits.
Okay. So I'm gonna be like a bird dog and stay on the question, which is, do you find a 9/1 date workable and 120 days gets revised to 90 days? That's the choice.
So
In front of us.
So September 1 is when. September 1, the default delivery agent will tell us what their credit costs are going to be. And then we have 90 days to decide whether or not we're gonna write a check or make an investment. It's just,
Yeah, a decision to opt in, opt out.
that's not my time. But the bigger problem is pre-bus, guaranteed price contracts. If we're selling a guaranteed price contract, we're doing it in May, June, July, August. If we don't know what our fixed costs are going to be, you're either violating Vermont law, which says you must obtain a surety bond, or you must obtain the paper gallons or wet barrels of that fuel that you are selling within 7 days of selling that contract. So you're either violating Vermont law from 2006, or you're just not offering fixed price programs. If you don't know your costs until 90 days before winter. That's the problem. For those fuel dealers that sell fixed price contracts and those consumers that rely on them, to ensure that their price is stable throughout the winter.
So I sense that, yeah, it's, there's some challenges with the timeline for every party all the way along the way, and I think everyone's proceeding in good faith. And what we're trying to do is make an adjustment that allows people the smoothest trajectory we can that allows for rational planning, I'm not hearing you propose other dates.
Just July
Other
1
than
day.
July 1 for a registration date. Okay, Senator Watts.
Thank you. So on that July shift in question, fuel dealers work on, so I'm used to school schedules, right, where we were working on the fiscal year that is, begins and ends like June, July. I can only, actually, I shouldn't assume, I don't know do fuel dealers generally work on a similar like fiscal year, like with the schools or that municipal budgets, like that kind of thing, or do they work on a calendar fiscal year? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's very much July 1, June 3rd. And there's, other than, I'm not here to ask for some theory, I'm not gonna get it. been there too long. But think about the people that are actually trying to count greenhouse gas emissions. And you have to normalize for weather. The biggest variable in our business is our sales. We can track them based on, we can see where they're going, right? But what the variable is, that's pretty consistent when sales go down. Warm weather, we have more efficient equipment, better fuel, better construction. But what we don't know is the weather. And so if you're gonna normalize for the weather, take into account very cold and very warm weather, winters, it just makes so much more sense from an accounting perspective, from a greenhouse gas accounting perspective, to count the thermal sector at least, to do July 1 to June 30th. Because January and December are coldest, we move half our gallons in those 60 days.
Thank you. Well, so we've had the first deadline for registering with this past January, right? And we have 30% compliance or whatever. And it's, my understanding is that moving forward, it would be every July 31st, or no, I'm sorry, every January 31st. That anybody new coming in would have to register. So this is potentially an ongoing date. I guess I would, especially since we have at least a little bit of data that's got us rolling here, I guess I would say I'm open to the discussion.
So, given the crossover deadline, I'm not ignoring what you're saying, I'm just gonna put it out a parallel track to have a discussion. First and foremost, what I wanna make sure is we get squared up on the DDA question that everyone has brought to the committee to sort out. And I'd like to follow up, so just briefly from, let me ask the PC and then Senator White, I see your hand, sorry about that. From the PUC or department perspective, a different reporting date, what's the impact on the a different registration date? The obligation is still a calendar year obligation. I don't know if you can comment about the difference between, if it's problematic to have a registration date that does not align with the date on which you calculate an obligated party's obligation, which is calendar year basis under the law.
I'm not entirely sure. I will note that there is provision in Act 18 that allows the commission to change the date, and I think we can just do it by order. Yeah, and Tom Mauer has my boss, or had his mic off, so if he's been more in the weeds than I have 6 weeks.
Mr. Mauer, I don't know if you could hear Mr. McNamara talking about, is it, you already have the discretion to be able to change by order the registration date?
That's correct. The statutory citation is section 8124B1, and that it didn't allow us to change the January 31, 2024 date, but any future registrations, the commission could amend that date. As to the practical impact of what, if that occurred on July 1st, as Mr. Cota is suggesting, I'm not in a position to say in real time how that would have knock-on effects. Something that is definitely worth considering.
Okay. Can I just one thing very sure, which is to say, change the obligation to also July 1 to June 30. Make it all uniform. You're dealing with the heating space. You're dealing with what if the company decides to not enter this market or exit this market. You do not want them to do that on December 31st. I'd rather them do that June 30.
Okay, thank you. Senator White, thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you actually asked the question that you've asked both questions, which I've tried to get on, and I just want to make sure that I heard the answer to both of them, which is, and thank you, Mr. Cota, for coming and testifying. I remember you flagging this point early on last year, and I had assumed that that was something that could be changed moving forward, and it sounds like that is correct, in that the authority is something that the PUC has. So that reaffirms information that I had, and I appreciate that. So that was gonna be my question. And then, just to be clear, I believe I heard you say you are comfortable with all the dates that we are discussing now. That's to you, Mr. Coda.
I'm sorry, it's weird hearing you over my ear.
Yes, I apologize.
No, I understand. Senator White, I'm not speaking on behalf of the technical advisory group. Because I want to make that clear, because they are not in agreement. I am speaking on behalf of myself and the obligated parties who will have to make this decision. I am comfortable with moving the June 1 date to a time in 2025. The part that I think I'm concerned about, and I just want to, I think I'm echoing what Mr. Walk said, which is that timeline between when the default delivery agent is chosen or agents are chosen.
This is the 90 days point.
Yes.
You don't believe 90 days is enough time. What is enough time?
I'd like 180 days.
180 days?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
But
And that answers my question. I appreciate that. Thank you.
but the September 1 date is the earliest date, but it's still problematic from a standpoint of being able to price your product in the summer months to achieve the best possible deal for your customers. So I understand why September 1 is more feasible and more practical. It's just that first year is going to be complicated. And I just want to say that's what's happening here. Same thing with the registration date, same thing. If this works, right? Eventually it will be too, but these are the rough patches that will sink this idea.
So, great, thank you for sharing, like your delivery side perspective on how implementing the program would work. What I'm sensing is that there's sufficient agreement to stick with 9/1/25 and a 90-day window. So I will ask council to draft that language for our consideration. I'll if I can get time council, I'll circulate that to the whole group for review. And I would ask, given that we're in tight timelines, if people could take a look today, if they see something that you actually, let's be explicit. Thumbs up, thumbs down from people on whether those are agreeable dates for. And on 7/1 registration date. We've already passed the first one. The PUC has discretion as to whether or not to amend to order. So I think the productive place for you to carry that conversation forward is with them as the regulators.
If I may. With all due respect,
And then we're gonna,
with all due respect.
Yeah.
They may do something. Yes. You can mandate, that's right, and that's fair. Also. The registry, remember how Act 18 is written, the registry will stay forever unless Act 18 is rescinded, even if the clean heat standard never comes to pass.
so we.
And it's important from the counting gallons, counting greenhouse gas emissions, I was actually in favor of it. But let's get it right, let's get the date right, because it will live forever, and if the clean heat standard never comes to pass, then I'll be back here next year asking the registry date to be moved, because you will have it, how to do it, so let's do it now.
Okay. Now I see why you're running for office. Okay, thank you. We'll keep the conversation going. With that, Senator McCormick.
There's a lot of insider language in this discussion. Sure. This is all, we're all talking in insider language. I'm thinking now about going home and explaining this to my constituents, who have their own insider language on other things, but not necessarily this. Someone will say to me, well, you're just kicking the can down the road. That we kick the can down the road by not the legislature just doing this a year ago or 2 years ago, doing it in this room, instead passing it on to the PUC. And now we're being asked to push some deadlines to extend the schedule further into the future. That this is just someone will say to me, this is just kicking the can down the road. How do you answer that?
Senator, may I
In
respond?
the vernacular, yeah, how do you answer my, in the vernacular?
It's the same place it was before. We are changing some key dates to ensure that it's implemented in a way that can be successful. Can is in the same place it was before, but we just got some of the process in the wrong order, we're fixing it.
Yeah, I agree, no.
Absolutely. We're not proposing at all any change to the end to the actual obligation and when the program starts. In my view, I think I said this on Tuesday, in my view, we should never set the June 1st, 2024 deadline. That was a mistake from the beginning. And we're trying to fix that retroactively, and it is not extends 2 or 3, maybe 2 other dates, I think, 1 other date, but not the end resolution.
I have, there's just this gut feeling, I have had similar conversations years ago when my kids were teenagers. That they won the argument, said, okay, you made your point. I still have the day, how did they get me to do that?
All right, well, I hope that, thank you, Mr. Koda. Thank you, Mr. McIntyre. I hope that was helpful in terms of sorting it back out, plain speech. No change to the implementation date, change to some internal deadlines to make the process more practicable from here to that unchanged January 26th date.
Senator McCormick's issue. We are participating today and have been for the last couple of years in what is termed as predatory delay, where those who profit from the current system find excuses to continue to profit from the current system and leave it all to our grandchildren. And the way to do it is to keep delaying action. That's what we're doing here today. Started years ago with calling climate service a hoax. And then the myth that we're gonna make petroleum products not generate greenhouse gases, and we just keep not dealing with the issue. And it goes through, it's us that are the ones that are not tackling this and finding excuses to postpone deadlines, actions, reports, registrations, anything to postpone anything that will slow down the changes that our grandchildren are gonna have to pay for. And in the meantime, make all of us in this room get paid to participate in the slowdown. I sound like a wacko. That, you're not supposed to say this, but that's what we're doing as in this building. And all the folks here that are good intent and educated, that's what we are doing.
So, Senator McDonald, since people may be alarmed by that.
They may be alarmed,
Yeah,
they may be alarmed.
yeah, that's the way I speak. They may be alarmed by what you're saying, but I would say despite my profound affection and admiration for your ways of thinking and sorting things out. We are changing not by a single minute the delivery date for the program. So we're adjusting internal. Yeah, you go back to D-Day and there are many steps to land in Normandy. We're adjusting.
That was in 44. North Africa was in 42.
All right, well, I'm not gonna, I will lose
Less than
every
a year
military analogy I can come up
Less
with.
than a year after Pearl Harbor.
All right.
I'd like to remind the senator that World War II started in Europe in the 30s, not in 41, the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
You are correct.
All right.
I'm talking about our involvement. For years, we said the federal government has to deal with climate change, and now we are part of it. And you are correct, but what you say creates doubt. And the way you engages, right? The way one engages in predatory delay is to quibble over the insignificant facts and allow the system to continue for the benefit of those people who are become wealthy in it at the expense of our grandchildren that have to pay for it. And when we do not act and when we postpone, that's what we're doing. And we're all good people in here, some crazier than others, some, you know, on both ends of the spectrum.
So. I'm not gonna disagree at all that that practice goes on, but what I'm gonna disagree 100% with is that that practice is happening here now. We're changing an internal deadline in a process that ends on the literal same date. So that for me is like period, full stop. All right, so I'll ask for language to be drafted to that effect. I'll circulate it to the group, ask people, please help the committee keep moving by reviewing it, and if we see any issues with it, we'll let me know at your earliest possible convenience. With that, we'll throw the switch and go over to 305, the miscellaneous bill, under which we're discussing the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act. We, my short summary for what we're talking about next is that we had an initial EMA pilot, 20 to 23, we re-upped it for 24 to 26. With similar language that created the first one, we tried to continue it and ask for the second one. In the process between Department of PUC, it got interpreted, we got a different outcome, even though our language was very similar. And that was that there was a budget recommendation to reduce the budget and to award just a first year of the 3. The impact of that has been that it creates uncertainty for the energy efficiency utilities that are implementing the pilot and handling. So all we want to do here, in my mind, is to sort out that we're looking to see the full award made for the full time period so that the pilot will be unencumbered and go forward. We're not suggesting that there be no evaluation metrics to determine whether or not a project should be approved. And I think it's that decision metric that I think we just need to be a little more clear about. So let me pause. Because I'm talking on behalf of lots of people when I say all that, and see if we'll start in the same order yesterday. With the PUC and Mr. McNamara and Ms. Bailey, thank you for coming on behalf of the department. So let's check in with you folks on how we can express that in a way that seems clear and responsible.
Great, thank you. So again, Ed McNamara, Chair of the PUC. I just want to start at the very beginning. I have no involvement in this proceeding at the PUC, and I'm not going to be involved in this PUC proceeding. I actually asked to speak here today just because I want to come with a really quick discussion about legislative intent and how we as the commission review something. And if there's a statute that says up to $2 million, 1 million, whatever that is giving us discretion. You may all 5 of you in this room might say, well, we clearly think it should be 2 million. The other 175 legislators don't know that. The other 175 legislators are passing a bill that says up to and giving us full discretion to figure out if it's 0 or 2 million. So all I'm asking is that you be very clear. If you want $2 million to go to a specific program, please say that in the bill, say that in the statute. If you want this to automatically happen, just take away the PUC's jurisdiction and say this, or sorry, not jurisdiction, discretion, and say the EDUs shall be able to use $2 million and shall provide notice to the PUC and the department once they decide to do so. Ms. Hoffman, general counsel for the PUC, has drafted two different variations. One is to clear, if you want the EDUs to just take the money and use this, then just provide notice. That's one option. The other still provides discretion. It sounds, Senator Bray, that you're looking for something in between there where my preference would be very clear about what the dollar amount is. And also very clear about our discretion as to how we measure cost effectiveness, for example. Like what particular measures, put some bounds around that, because otherwise, the less clarity there is, the more discretion you're giving us and the less intent you're providing. Because again, if the statute is very clear, you read it on that. Even if I sit here and you tell me, well, I want you to spend 2 million. And then you pass a bill that said up to 2 million, I'm gonna be assuming I don't have to approve the full 2 million. So that's all I want to be clear about today is how we interpret language is how you write it. And so if you want to have 2 million over 3 years, please just say that. That's just my request.
Yeah. Well, thanks, and I think because you all are regulators and basically sort of the eyes and ears of the policy that the legislature expresses, where we're always trying to maximize the utility of any dollars spent, although it's an energy efficiency charge, not a tax. It has a similar impact. Ratepayers and taxpayers become almost synonymous. So we have that fiduciary responsibility, and we have successfully counted on you year after year to help us manifest that. And so I think we're not looking to simply say, write the check. And I think we're looking for language that helps us preserve that sort of strategic, thoughtful investment. And I think, I think that's the fine line we're working towards. We have a history of making that work. And so I'm going to be optimistic and figure out we can find the right way to express it here. Ms. Newman has given us 2 drafts from Ms. Hoffman. So Ms. Hoffman, thank you. Now finally it's time for me to say thank you out loud. Thank you for those 2. And maybe
She has to.
I think maybe since you're the author, do you want to just talk to us about what you've put into each version? And let's figure out how we're going to identify which one is which, because they do have the same label at the top.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steph Hoffman, General Counsel for the PUC, for the record. Let's first identify the documents. So if you turn to page 3 of the document,
Which one?
of either one, it doesn't matter. This will just help us identify which one you're looking at.
Yeah.
If section B, that should be near the top of that, starts with crossing off the beginning, notwithstanding any provisions, that one we're calling edits 1. And if it doesn't, it retains that language and has a cross off of the PUC shall authorize on the second line of subsection B, then that's edits 2. And I'll refer to them using those labels, but I'll explain what each of them is attempting to highlight for the committee.
So I'm going to need, could you just say that again, because I'm reading, trying to read, go back and forth between the 2, and I'm having a little trouble catching what line they're using to label one versus the other.
So page 3, there should be a little B on approximately line 3 for depending on the way it printed.
Yes.
if little b starts with an immediate cross out of the notwithstanding any provision of law or order of the Public Utility Commission, that is edits 1.
Okay, thank you. Got
And
it.
if it does not start that way, then you're on edits 2.
Okay, and I see that our committee assistant has already labeled these properly with edit 1 and edit 2. I'm the one who's having to catch up here. Okay, thanks for that.
You're welcome. And if the committee, I think, would benefit from a little bit of context before I jump into what these drafts are attempting to provide to the committee for context. Section 209 of Title 30, subsection D3B, which is referenced in all versions of the rewrite of Act 44, is the part of law currently that provides the standards for the commission to set a demand resource plan budget. And that includes as a subset the resource acquisition budget. And it's inside of that resource acquisition budget that the funds for Act 44 pilot programs are diverted to the use of the energy efficiency utilities for these additional outlined purposes. That's standard in any version of the bills that either passed, either Act 44, Act 151, or what's being currently considered as version 1.2, aren't changed. So we have a set of 8 criteria that the commission has full discretion and is actually mandated to use its discretion to look at when determining what amount an energy efficiency utilities resource acquisition budget should be set at. And the touchstone for setting that budget is that it has to be consistent with the principles of least cost integrated planning as defined in section 218C. And the first 4 of the sub-criteria do include some overlap with the criteria that are outlined. For example, criteria 2 is to reduce the generation of greenhouse gases. And all 8 criteria have to be, according to the language of the statute, looked at by the commission to determine, quote, an appropriate balance among the following objectives in setting that budget. The nexus between the amount of money set and the rationale for setting it is intrinsic in the statutes. So we have to decide that the purpose that the money is used for is met in order to allocate the funding. And so an attempt to sort of strip the amount of funding decision away from the commission fundamentally alters the analysis that we are supposed to conduct when we're setting the overall budget. That is, I think, where the rubber hits the road here in terms of what language is going to effectuate the committee and the legislature's intent in moving this bill forward and what is practical or applicable in the context of these other statutes. And so to the extent that D3B in section 209 continues to persist and guide the commission in setting the demand resource budgets overall, it's difficult then to separate out this determination and still have the commission conduct its review because these standards are not necessarily in alignment. And I think that's what's happening. When we're doing the review, we have to apply D3B, but we have to also internalize the analysis that's required and is somewhat separate in Act 44. And so what I've offered here, just as an exercise perhaps, or perhaps the language does get to what the committee's goals are 2 different approaches. And each approach is very distinct. Edits 1 is a version of the bill that retains the commission's discretion in setting the entire resource acquisition budget based on D3B's principles and would pertain to the setting of the Act 44 pilot program elements of the budget that would presumably be submitted separately and subject to the commission's review. And I'll highlight what the differences are, and we can walk through some of those, but I just want to highlight at a high level that one of the conflicts right now in the version 1.2 that's been drafted is that, for example, on the bottom of page 3, where there's been a change, the subject of the sentence is no longer that the PUC is going to determine the amount, but instead that the entity is going to just offer the amount to the PUC. So the discretion is pulled from that section. But then on the very next page, on page 4, there's again a reference to the annual acquisition budget proposed by the entity being approved by the PUC. And again, intrinsic in that approval is our need to use the factors of D3B to determine what budget is appropriate, because cost effectiveness is by its own language a reference to the cost itself. And so if $2 million is not cost effective, we are in a conundrum of how we would proceed to approve a full $2 million budget for those programs if in fact, as was discussed yesterday, weatherization, just as an example, if that's more cost effective in the analysis and the modeling and the evidence versus EV rebates or heat pump rebates or heat pump implementation programs or other services and programs offered through this act. And then the other edits to document is a version of the bill that would strip the PUC of its review authority, which again seems to follow, at least in part, the intent of the version 1.2 language to have a proposal from the energy efficiency utility of X amount of money allocated to these types of programs, where they would make a notice filing with the commission informing us that they're allocating a sub portion of their resource acquisition budget. They would explain what the programs, services, et cetera, that funding is intended to be used for. And the PUC would not then have to subject that notice of the allocation to any sort of review. So there's not a direct conflict with our sort of review processes for demand resource plan budget setting. So at a high level, that's what these two edits attempt to do. They also do, I'll make a quick aside, make the suggestion that Chair McNamara referenced earlier with regard to the recollection question that's in section 1. It adds the 90-day provision.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, excuse me. So thanks for laying out the conundrum you're in when you have evaluation metrics that require you to test all the monies forwarded, and then we're basically asking to evaluate in a different way just the $2 million. Mr. McNamara, does the commission have a preference between edit 1 and edit 2? I can see, one is very different, and then it sort of severs that question and makes the although the language is still sorry, go ahead. I'm just gonna stop there. Do you have a preference?
We do not have a preference. Again, we just want the clarity of, do we have the discretion, or do you want this to automatically happen? There is obviously some based on your earlier comments, and those came after Ms. Hoffman drafted these, and after we discussed yesterday afternoon. If you want $2 million, what I'd actually recommend is just ask the EDUs, what is the dollar amount? Give us a dollar amount that we just put in there instead of up to 2 million. Just what do you want in there, and have that be automatic, so we're not looking at that if that's what you want. And then also, how you want us to measure cost effectiveness, that's the part that gets honestly pretty squirrely.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I prefer the just, if you are saying, EVT, we trust you to spend these $2 million in a way that actually best deals with greenhouse gases, don't give us discretion. I do also want to note that I'm only speaking for the PUC.
Right.
The department is obviously its own regulatory entity.
Right.
And I'm not saying whether it's good policy or not, but I'm just trying to get to the clarity for the PUC of how we do our job. And I just, one or the other is definitely our strong preference.
Yeah.
If you want something in between, it's going to take a little bit of what exactly are the criteria. And it probably makes sense to have a fair amount of confusion on that.
Okay.
Understanding is a short period of time for individuals.
Thank you very much. Okay. So Ms. Bailey, thank you for coming back. You want to join us at the table? Sorry about this. And again, thanks again, Ms. Hoffman. Do you have copies of both those two, edit 1 and edit 2?
Yes, I've reviewed, both like one on paper copy, but I think I get the gist of, I mean, the PUC edits, yeah. So
What's the department thinking of this?
for the record, Melissa Bailey, Director of the City Energy Office, Department of Public Service. So we're waiting through, I think, 3 versions in play right now, and it 1.2 that was posted yesterday, and then the 2 PUC alternatives. So I can just jump in at a really high level, and we don't have an objection to the legislature, providing this clarity and directing the PUC with regard to the amount of money that they want diverted from the energy efficiency charge to these thermal and transportation sector policies. Again, as my understanding is, we're still talking about the current 3-year period. This bill still only applies to 24, 25, and 26, with potential revisit, potential extension, maybe contemplated in the future. So just kind of level setting there, we have the proposals from the EEU. So it's submitted to the PUC, they're under current process and investigation. PUC is proposing to spend $2 million per year. So again, that clarity, if the committee wants to go in and be explicit and say the proposal as submitted should be approved. I think that would benefit all parties in terms of providing clarity. I think the EE's spending is around 758,000 per year, the proposed spending. Again, it's been approved for year 1 through the PUC process, and year.
I think that's the ED's 3-year proposal.
Oh, sorry, yeah. It's like. It's spending 700 policies over the 3-year period. Regardless, we have those proposals. So I guess we're struggling a little bit with what criteria should or shouldn't be used to evaluate those proposals, or again, if the legislative intent is really just that those proposals that submitted should be approved and put into action, not just for the current year, but for the coming years, that legislative clarity should be pretty easy to achieve. Say that when language is in statute, we take that very seriously, and much of the PUC proceeding that is happening right now that has resulted in delays that I know have been problematic for the committee is the evaluation of those criteria. So again, if you want an approval of those programs, I would suggest removing the criteria, and that would remove the PUC's proceeding there.
This is really an EU question, but I just want to double check since you're involved in the chair. The proposals that came forward, they all lay out a work plan for all 3 years.
They do,
Okay.
funding levels, yes, and programs for all 3 years. I mean, I guess there's probably a question about whether there's direction to change those during that 3-year period, but they do contemplate 3 years worth of spending. And the PUC did again take the
I think.
did take the approach of approving this 1 year.
Sure, and the point, what I was asking underneath it all is there already enough information present in order to move forward, where there have to be all around of soliciting information from the users and the public? No, they brought a figure from them to the process.
They brought a 3-year plan to the process, and the department and the PUC have kind of requested, again, well, the department didn't request, but the PUC has imposed additional process and the opportunity to have back and forth with the EGUs about those proposals. And again, all of that back and forth is really around the criteria in the existing bill. Things like result in the largest possible greenhouse gas emissions reductions in a cost-effective manner. That's a lofty statement. Of course, we all share that goal, right? We all want the biggest GHG reductions in a cost-effective manner, but just putting the words on paper doesn't mean that they are reflected in the proposals. And there's a lot of analysis that needs to be done in order for the department to say we're supportive, and the PUC to say we approve these programs. So I think, again, we have concerns around what criteria are we looking at? How do we evaluate these programs? And so it's the language I see in version draft 1.2 that was posted yesterday, really just says services that provide reasonable opportunities to support greenhouse gas emissions. That's a very different metric than the largest possible cost-effective GHG reduction. So it's the committee intent is more of a reasonableness test. I think that could be put in there.
Can we pause for a minute? Senator White, you have a question?
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Bailey, for coming in and speaking to us again. So just so I understand, you're saying that the current language that we heard from Ms. Hoffman is not sufficient for answering that question of should you have not jurisdiction, discretion over these programs. You would like in language to have there be discretion taken away from the PUC and to have a fixed amount of money, that 3 million or 785,000 over a 3-year period listed in statute to actually be able to implement this so that you don't have to review it?
No, and thanks for the question. So again, I think this is a version issue. If draft 1.2 from yesterday is off the table, then I can kind of take my comments on that draft and table them. The PUC, either of the versions presented by the PUC that I reviewed this morning seem workable from the department's perspective. One clarifies that the PUC has discretion to determine an amount up to 2 million for the EUs and retains the criteria by which they'll make that determination. The other, essentially, I don't have it in front of me, has the entities propose their spending and their programs and eliminates the criteria by which the PUC and the department would have evaluated those. Either of those is workable from our perspective, Senator White. So I would want to give a final review to those that just got posted this morning, but in general, either of those versions could work. We do have significant concerns with draft 1.2 that was posted yesterday.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. So just so I understand what Ms. Hoffman introduced to us today, you are comfortable with, and you feel that it does give you the necessary removal of authority. I don't know the right way to put that because, but the ability to not do that, the weighing yourself, where you would almost always end up choosing to not fund those programs or to not approve those programs. That's what I'm understanding.
Yeah, I'm not sure that last part of the statement was accurate about would force us to recommend approval of those programs, but it clearly lays out what is within the PUC's jurisdiction and therefore what we call them and whether or not there are these criteria that we should have to decide the programs meet. So it's really a
So is it better, because I want to just make sure that we do what you're asking for to make sure that you understand the legislative intent of the committee. And I don't know if this is the full legislative intent of the entire committee, but my hope is that we do have these programs move forward. And I just want to be clear, I believe you said that you would need us to call out a specific number and to just say, go forward with those programs as the easiest, cleanest version for you to do it. Or for it to happen. And that's not what we heard from Ms. Hoffman necessarily. So those are two different things.
I believe edit 2 from the PUC achieves that.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. I just want to be very clear because I think that it was unclear last year and I don't want to end up in a situation like this again. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, if the committee is not interested in having an evaluation around all of those criteria and really just is interested in approval of the funding amount, then I believe edit 2 from the PUC gets you there. Again, by striking all of the criteria that were put in the law last year. That were around whether these programs are duplicative, whether they're complementary, whether they achieve GHG reductions in a cost-effective manner, all of those would be stricken in PUC second edit. So
Thank
there's
you.
no tension or conundrum about trade-offs. It's clear policy direction.
Great. Okay, thank you. That is how I personally feel. So if that is meeting that need, I appreciate it. And that is language I would support. Thank you.
Senator Watson, thank you. I'm trying to suss out how I feel about all of this. And so I'm wondering if I'm also trying to wrap my head around these two edits to make sure I really understand them. And I think what is in one option that is in my head anyway, that I don't think I see reflected here necessarily is because I think when I was thinking last year about re-upping this program, in my mind, it was $2 million. And I managed to omit a part in my brain about up to. And But I'm wondering if there's a middle ground in terms of saying. $2 million, eliminate the up to, but we do want it to achieve these outcomes. So something like keep the criteria, but let's make it $2 million. Is that? First of all, I don't think that's either of these edits. And is that suggestion, would that be workable?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a great question, and I think you like relay or zeroing in on the tension here.
Yeah.
So, a couple of comments, I just want to put a placeholder. We keep talking about the 2 million and we're not really focusing on the BED proposal, and so I think I just want to.
Thank you, yeah, no, I appreciate.
Are we asking, and because some of the language yesterday said should strive to provide the maximum amount of funding, and 2 million is the cap, and so the direction you're providing to BED, I think needs some more clarity and some safeguards there.
Fair.
But to your question specifically, so I think the tension there is you want the criteria to be met, but you potentially don't want the PUC to have that discretion to decide if those criteria are met. And so who judges, who decides that proposals put forth by the EUs meet these criteria? And if the PUC decides that they don't, which is kind of the current paradigm, can they authorize a lower amount than the 2 million for EBC? Is the legislature deciding whether they met the criteria, or, is the EU itself deciding I've met these criteria? And I think that's the crux of the struggle right now.
Sorry, just as a follow to that, so, I mean, is it? I'm wondering if the tension could be in, like, if we were to say, and here's some maximum, here's some amount of money that we want various programs to use towards this other goal. And then could the discussion or the negotiation be within how to spend that money rather than what the amount of money is? Does that, and I apologize, this is also me learning about your processes, so.
I think that makes sense. I think I would fear, we are partway into the first year, the EUs are delivering programs, so I do want to be respectful of that, and I do understand the concern around the year-to-year budgets. So if that proceeding was the EU's proposed $2 million of spending across a bucket of programs, the department comes in and says, actually, we think you should spend differently. I think that might still continue those concerns around ramping up and down programs. And there's the question around, I wouldn't want to be back in the same place next year saying, well, the department asked for the EV program to be ramped down and the heat pump program to be ramped up.
Yeah.
The EUs object to that. What was the committee's intent around spending? So it's really a question of how much does the committee want to delegate to the PUC process across the street? It's a formal process and relies on factual filings. And how much is it really an intent to say we want 2 million spent as has been proposed? Again, we have those proposals on the table. So last year, this was more of a theoretical exercise. We didn't know what programs would be proposed. We said up to 2 million. Now we have those proposals, and if the intent of the legislature is really that those should be given the green light for the next 2 years. I think I would recommend just being think about that. And we're going to be back in a couple of years deciding whether this pilot should extend for another 3 years or in perpetuity. So again, I don't have a lot of answers about the $2 million proposal that EDP has put forward. We have concerns, you've heard those from me, but really it's about approving $2 million in 2025 and 2026. I think that should be relatively easy to get there.
The may spend a portion up not to exceed 2 million edit 2 that's the discretion of the EEU, not the department. That's the way I read that.
PUC edit 2 in PUC edit 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, edit 2, I believe, takes away the PUC's discretion completely. That's what the entity decides how much.
The entity decides if it's will spend up to 2. So you know, I mean, I think that addresses the whole thing of how do we name the member? It's the entity, if the EEU itself says, yeah, we worked on the plan and we see that we think we have $2 million worth of stuff, though. Go to that limit. Because if they felt like they didn't have it, that's all that, they would go to a lower number, but it takes the burden off, the regulated side to evaluate whether or not that should be a problem. Yeah. So thank you. So I wanna, that's very helpful, and I'd like to go and talk to some of the folks who would be on the receiving of this and ask. Mr. Walker here, I don't know if Mr. Springer is gonna pop back in or not. And we also have Mr. Zwicky in the room, and VGS is also an EEU, which they represent VGS, correct? Okay, so let's check about folks who are trying to work with this language, in order to figure out what they're gonna be authorized to do. Thank you, Mr. Master.
Oh, just have to note that I have to leave, Ms. Hoffman and Mr. Nauer to continue.
Okay, great. I thank you and the department for contributing so much time to the committee process this morning. Again, my hope is we will circulate a plan, not hope, circulate language this afternoon and see if we get everyone laying in the same place in consensus.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
For the record, Peter Walk, Managing Director of Efficiency Mark and EIC. I want to clarify a few things that I think will be important to the committee's discussion. I appreciate the PUC coming to the table wanting to establish clear or some clarity around what your intent is, and I appreciate Ms. Hoffman's provision of two different versions. We find both to be currently unworkable as drafted, and I'll provide some clarity there. I think I'll start with version 2, which is probably the simplest version. I want to underscore that that you establish those criteria for evaluation of the program, which said these are the things that we want you to try to achieve, EUs, that are separate from the evaluation criteria of 209 DB3, right? Or D3D, excuse me, B3. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So those were over the course of the initial passage and the extension last year, those were discussion items with other key stakeholders, right? Our work collaborating with the distribution utilities is incredibly important, especially as it relates to tier 3. So these were agreed upon tenets that should not be struck from any bill that this committee pursues. It's really important that those stay because that it's a bought-in process that this is established. So I think those need to stay. You asked the PUC to evaluate and the department to weigh in on those criteria. There is conflict between these criteria and 209D, right? In such that you can't square them. Right, but you said that that's okay. You've said that we want this to be a special scenario whereby you're evaluating based on these criteria. For example, the 209D D3 piece there, 3B has already been deemed not to allow for the support of electric vehicles. Right, so under the first draft that Ms. Hoffman provided, there would be no way by which they could approve the current plan as submitted, at least through efficiency Vermont. I can't speak to BEDs, but for ours, a good portion of that, as we've talked about, is that support for the electric vehicle market. And if it's already been ruled and there's precedent established, I don't see how that's a workable alternative. We would be going back to the drawing board to come up with other options. And again, we've talked about this is important work, right? And the longer we delay, and I was wrong, I should have said it started in 1937 with the invasion of China by Japan, but that's neither here nor there. we,
We're leaving out the Boer War.
Sorry, we, these programs are important and we would like to advance this work that you have told us you want us to do. And so I believe that the clarity provided in in the amendment 1.2 is workable and still the best option on the table. I could imagine changes to version 2 whereby we are attesting to meeting those criteria, right? As you hold other entities accountable, right? You're providing a budget to them with the expectation that they deliver those things.
That seems like it's sort of the best of both worlds. In that. We lay the criteria that were worked out between all those parties, which are important, as you say, it's like an ecosystem. Everyone had a voice in how the proposals will get crafted. If all that language stays, but it's there to design metrics, what you bring forward. And someone can say, well, you're self-certified. And say, we're so far into the process that I don't think that's in any way, shape, or form.
Our proposals are public knowledge and have not changed drastically since the first 3-year period, and so if this committee were not supportive of those, I would not have seen the letter that you submitted in the fall to the PUC, right? So I think it's reasonable to assume that you would like us to see us move forward with these programs. And so I think providing some clarity so the PUC and the department don't have to spend a lot of time putting a square peg in a round hole. Would be valuable to everybody. We're still gonna do the level of analysis to attest that we've achieved the results that you've set out for in the statute.
Yeah.
Because that's the obligation you set to us.
Great. All right, so I'm sensing that in rough terms, edit 2. Maintaining the criteria, the design criteria that are expressed in there, for instance, programs, measures, and services authorized pursuing shall and set all that language. Okay.
I think that's really important, and I think if you were to make any changes there, you would want to hear from the other partners who are involved in the development of that language, and I think I would like to limit your committee time on this and think that that is certainly the best path forward is to keep that in there because that's really important language in it. It's how we've developed this plan with those things on it.
Right, and it reflected a whole round of conversations a
Yep.
year ago.
As
We come to a balanced design metric or goal. Okay, great. Any committee questions for Mr. Wall? Right, Mr. Zwicky. You represent another energy efficiency utility. I don't know, you're following along this morning. Any thoughts on, I don't know if you want to chime in from there, join us at the table, either way. I'd say the proposal that seems to be moving out of this discussion is edit 2, reinstating all those design metrics that balance out the competing interests of parties.
Yes, I'll speak from here, because I think I'll be brief. Dylan's waiting on both affairs. On behalf of BGS, I don't believe BGS has had the opportunity to review the comments submitted by Ms. Hoffman this morning. And so I don't have feedback for the meeting today. I have to take that back to them and provide comments at a later date if there are concerns or comments. I will just say, I think, appreciate Mr. Walk's comments about the collaborative process that was involved in developing the legislation we passed last year, and it's important to maintain some of those criteria, or all of those criteria, for in the interest of broad support for this.
Sure. To be frank about it, I would hope all the parties that supported last year's language would support keeping that language the same, because that's how we all launched together. So, but just stating that. Okay, well, that's helpful. So again, I will work with council to get ASAP, a version that reflects Ms. Hoffman's edit 2 plus the reinstatement of the criteria that are expressed beginning in the last sentence towards the bottom of page 3, program measures and services authorized shall, then it goes through a set of design goals. Where's the in?
Mr. Springer apologized that he was not able to come back, but I mean, we echo Mr. Walk's testimony. Those criteria important to keep based on the stakeholder discussions previously, but understand the need for more clarity of direction for the piece.
Okay,
Agreed.
okay, great. Ms. Baylor.
Yeah, I just want to know, the department's perspective or, departments from a policy perspective would be not to have the criteria stay without a clear assignment of responsibility for meeting those criteria. If the committee chooses to take that path, I think what was just verbally discussed was that there is a self-certification by the EEU, and I think that should be explicit. The EEU shall certify that it, in its determination, it has met these criteria, to be really clear that that's where that responsibility and that accountability lies. We typically bear responsibility for evaluating these programs, and I don't want it to be implied that the department has certified that these criteria are met. So if that's the intent is a self-certification around spending of the $2 million, I think that should be explicit in there. And again, it's not the department's preference to have that self-certification, but that's an option. And regarding the stakeholder discussion that happened last year that you keep referencing around these criteria, I agree, those criteria were a consensus product. So was the language around shall spend in an amount to be determined by the commission up to $2 million. That was also part of the stakeholder discussion. And so I actually recommend the committee do hear from those other people who were involved in those discussions last year. I see the EC just walked into the room. But it's not that we're not changing the consensus proposal from last year. We are proposing a change to the consensus proposal from last year, and it's a substantial one.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Mr. Walk, if you're designing to them, would we just ask a question on the fly for?
Peter Walk, I think we would want to see language establishing who is putting their, attesting that these meet the criteria you set, and we think it's appropriate for the EU to do that. I have some language that, that our team has been thinking about that could be added to the PUC's language to address that, if you like me to choose.
Yes, please.
Okay. I mean, I think it's as simple. Would you like me to come back, or do you want me to do it from here? I think it's as simple as saying an entity spending a portion of its electric resource acquisition budget as outlined in this section shall submit notice of the amount of the annual acquisition budget pursuant to subsection B of this section to the PUC with demonstration that the programs measured or services under section have either been approved in prior years. This is sort of mixing some of the 1.2, but trying to basically say that we are attesting that it's met the criteria established, and we can clean some of this up. Okay, but I generally speaking, I don't want any lack of clarity for anybody involved in the process as to who's attesting to the validity of these programs.
Great. Okay. All right, thank you. So I will look back to the folks that were part of that earlier consensus work. It was a broader group with more utilities involved, for instance, and circulate that language as well. And then please too, and when you receive it, so Mr. Walker, if you would send that on, I will.
Yeah, I want to, based on my reading and on the fly, I think there's some editing that could occur.
Yeah, okay, so if you will send on, when you're comfortable with what you have, if you'll send that on, then I'm gonna schedule time with council this afternoon to put these together, and then that will give us something to circulate. The other thing is, if you know of any party that you believe is interested, that, we're not present in the room at the moment, please assist us in sharing it so that no one who you think ought to have seen it, heard it, read it, will have missed it. Okay, so thank you, everyone. This is always one of the most challenging things. Editing as a group. as painful as it is, I think we've provided a good place tentatively. So with that, we've been going 2 hours straight. I apologize to the committee. Let's take